of young people. And so, okay, I wrote a book about SNCC.
SNCC represents the closest thing we have in the United States to that militant mood of change which one finds in emerging nations abroad. It constantly aims to create and recreate, out of the bodies of poor and powerless people, a new force, nonviolent but aggressive, honest and therefore unmanageable. It wants to demonstrate to the nation not what kind of system people should believe in, but how people should live their lives. So its radicalism is not an ideology, but a mood. Moods are harder to define. They are also harder to imprison.
Certainly the writing of the book, The New Abolitionist, set a tone. And I think that might have led us to some degree to have that kind of little intellectual edge about us.
And so what Howard did was lift us onto the pages of history and really made us conscious that we were involved in a struggle that had historical weight.
One of the things that comes through when you look at someone like Howard is you recognize that being a historian or being a journalist doesn't relieve you of your other civic responsibilities. I assume that mainstream historians also go and vote, but somehow we find it a little bit more challenging when we find out they go out and protest also.
I remember in his book when he's talking about the Hattiesburg Freedom Day, and he has a scene in there where he comes into the courtroom. When he gets in there, he finds that some black people have been sitting on the white side, and he's going to sit on the black side.
There was an extremely tense moment when the Hattiesburg chief law officer said, "Now, there's a colored side and a white side, and I want all the colored people to move to that side and the white people to move to the other side." Nobody moves.
And then one of the police officers starts moving towards him, and Howard raises his hand, and the judge asks him if he has something to say, and he says that the Supreme Court has ruled that it's illegal to segregate in any courtroom in the United States, and would you mind following the law of the Supreme Court?
And it was one of those marvelous moments when authority and tradition of a bad kind is challenged, and just because of firmness and willingness to risk what could have been a bloodbath, in the wrong hands, there was at least that moment of change.
Democracy is not just a counting up of votes. It is a counting up of actions. Without those on the bottom acting out their desires for justice, as the government acts out its needs, and those with power and privilege act out theirs, the scales of democracy will be off. That is why civil disobedience is not just to be tolerated. If we are to have a truly democratic society, it is a necessity.
What's interesting to me is that both Stoughton Lynn and Howard Zinn, the only white professors that I remember who joined the civil rights movement and taught in black colleges, were also the first to go with me to North Vietnam.
In Southeast Asia, we want nothing more and nothing less than the assured and guaranteed independence of the peoples of that area. We are in Southeast Asia to help our friends preserve their own opportunity to be free of imported terror, of alien assassination managed by the North Vietnam communists based in Hanoi and backed by the Chinese communists from Peking.
Telling the truth, a truth that the president doesn't want told, can be very powerful. You have the chance, if you know a truth that politicians are trying to conceal, you have the chance, just by telling it effectively, to save a great many lives, and that's a power that you don't have every day.
Now, this was in the beginning of '68. The Tet Offensive is on in Vietnam, and there's a sudden uprising of rebellion, Viet Cong, a National Liberation Front, all over South Vietnam. And while I'm teaching my seminar, somebody comes in to the seminar and says to me, "I have a telephone call for you." So I told the class to wait, and and I went out, and there was Dave Dellinger on the other end of the line, and says, "Well, the North Vietnamese have decided that as a gesture at the time of the Tet holiday in Vietnam, they want to release the first 3 airmen." I said, "Well, okay, when?" "Tomorrow morning." That was it. I packed my bag, and the next morning I was in an apartment in Greenwich Village, meeting Dave Dellinger, Tom Hayden, and for the first time, Dan Berrigan. And we hopped on a plane that day and flew halfway around the world.
What indications from North Vietnam have you had that you'll be able to pick these men up?
Well, the sole thing that I'm aware of was a telegram sent from Hanoi and arriving, I believe, when was it, Sunday?
And it was addressed to Dave Dellinger of the American Peace Movement, and it said that the North Vietnamese were prepared to release 3 American airmen if the peace movement would send a representative to Hanoi.
So you expect to get the men or have the men released to your custody in Hanoi, not here?
That's what we expect, yeah.
It was, the other side of the moon for both of us. The Tet uprising had occurred in South Vietnam, in Saigon, and everything was frozen, including ourselves.
Remember, they even got into the embassy. They took over the American embassy in Saigon. It was a very frightening thing for the American establishment and the American public. And so Dan Berrigan and I spent a week in Vientiane before the plane finally was able to get out of Saigon, come to Vientiane in Laos and take us on a strange trip through the night to Hanoi.
We were in night shelters, bomb shelters in the hotel practically every night. We toured the shelters of the city. Practically all children had been evacuated.
Well, we saw Hanoi under siege and war, and we experienced bombings every day in Hanoi. And this is my first time on the receiving end. It was a sobering experience to feel what it was like being bombed rather than bombing.
Then one day, suddenly, all these things happened suddenly. We were brought unexpectedly into a big hall, into this blinding light, into this international forest of cameras and news people, and they paraded the 3 airmen into the room, still in their prison uniform. We had an agreement with the White House that they would be in our custody back to New York, and that would be honored. We landed in Vientiane. Aboard came this unspeakable character, Robert Sullivan, ambassador to Laos.
They will fly in the air attache's aircraft to Udon, remain overnight there, and return by most expeditious means to the United States.
The representatives of the embassy here in Vientiane, while talking about free choice for the pilots, made it clear that the United States preferred that they go back by military plane.
Major, you were in the plane there for about 45 minutes. What was the discussion all about?
I'm not at liberty to discuss that. Not only did the North Vietnamese make it clear to us